Hi, this is the Magnificent Midlife Podcast and I'm Rachel Lancaster. This is where we celebrate women in midlife and beyond. We challenge the status quo and bash those negative stereotypes about being an older woman. We're not over the hill at 40, 50, 60. We're just getting started. And the world needs us now more than ever. I'll be talking all things midlife, about issues that matter, and sharing fabulous stories of amazing women doing very cool stuff. Now is our time. Welcome back to the summer season, where I am dipping into the Magnificent Midlife podcast archives to bring you some of the gems from the vault. Today it's Elaine Miller, who is a pelvic health physiotherapist and a stand-up comedian. Yes, you might not think those two things go together, but Elaine has made it her mission to end incontinence through raising awareness and laughing a lot about it along the way. So this is a really funny conversation, but about a serious topic. But she reminds us that incontinence is common but not normal. There are so many things we can do about it, and if we get the right advice and the right help, it does not have to be an issue for most of us. So enjoy my conversation with Elaine Miller.
Thank you for having me.
You're very, very welcome. So, first off, Elaine, how on earth did you end up doing what you do and taking your knowledge of the pelvic floor on the stage?
Yeah, it is a bit random, isn't it? So I'm a physio and my background's in sports stuff. And then I had 3 kids, and after that, the sort of science of continence became fascinating. So I landed up working in pelvic health, which I love. It's a it's a great area to work in because the women get better. Like sometimes you don't need to do an awful lot to somebody to really improve the quality of their life. But the thing that frustrated me in clinic was that usually the story is the woman's had a problem with leaking or a sexual dysfunction for a long, long time before they seek help. The average is 7 years.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and that's the average. The reality, like the thing that triggered me to write the show was this woman came in and was very upset because she was in a terrible state. Like she really didn't have very much in the way of bladder control at all. And she said she'd been leaking since the baby was born. Now, you get quite a good poker face when you work in, genitals. You make no assumptions. And I did think, okay, since the baby was born, I said, how old is your baby? He was 47. I was like, thank goodness.
Oh my goodness.
You get older mums. I was an older mum myself, but I did think, oh, you're pushing it a bit. So she'd had this awful problem for the best part of 50 years.
Oh my.
And it's not uncommon.
Goodness.
So it frustrates me because physio really works for these problems. And if we can just get women to know that, then hopefully they'll come to clinic earlier. So I had another lady that was telling me a story about her wetting herself on her doorstep, but she was from Glasgow, so she was funny and she was meaning to be funny, but it was a terrible story. So I said to her, look, can I use that on stage? Because I had a hobby of doing stand-up. And I wrote a short set, 5-minute set about wetting yourself on the doorstep. Didn't say that I was a physio and that you didn't need to put up with these problems. It was just for the comedy that I was using it. And 4 women said to me, oh, me too. And I thought maybe there's something in this that these women hadn't sought help. They hadn't told anybody about this problem because they were embarrassed, but they would tell a stranger in a basement bar. So I decided that I would just write a Fringe show because I live in Edinburgh. So, the Fringe happens every year round about me. And I thought, how hard can it be? And I just took what you see in clinic, like the evidence-based practice, and made it into humour. And it seems to be an approach that works for some women. I think because it's just embarrassing. Talking about these things is really taboo. So I'm delighted that you raise this because it's so important.
Well, the funny thing is that when I first, sort of started out on my mission, I started my magazine, The Mutton Club. I think you were one of the first women I found and profiled as a midlife reinvention, because I just loved this story of a pelvic floor physiotherapist who then went on to be a stand-up comedian. And you've been doing this now since 2013, haven't you?
Yeah. The first show that I did, the first year that I did was then, which wasn't yesterday, actually. And I did think that year, there's no way that people are going to come to a show about, pelvic floors. This is going to be a disaster. And the average Fringe show, so the Edinburgh Festival is massive. The population doubles, and it's a whole month of festivals, and it's huge. It's the biggest arts festival in the world. So getting an audience is a bit of a challenge, and the average audience is 8. So I thought, nobody is going to come. This is just going to be an exercise in, humility. And I had like 120 people coming to the show. And I'd like to think that's because I'm hilarious, but actually it's because women are desperate for the information. And because I'm local, I knew where the local women's groups, running clubs, parenting groups and things like that were. So I emailed round all the nurseries to say, I'm doing this show, and that's how I got an audience. But now that it's gone on a bit, and I've been thinking a bit more deeply about, well, why does humour seem to work? I think it's because if you laugh together, you know that you're sharing a problem, so it helps address the sort of social isolation. It's a real barrier to women seeking help for pelvic floor problems. That's my theory anyway.
I think that works. We need a menopause show as well then, don't we? There is a menopause the musical. I haven't seen that, but
there's a few there, and Hormonal Housewives does stuff. Julie Coombs got a good show about it. There's a few. Pauline Ear's got one, and I'd quite like to see like a women's festival where they just have a bunch of shows using the arts that are themed towards women's health and women's issues, and that would be right up my street.
What a great idea. We might have to start working on that one. That's a fabulous thing, isn't it? But I think you're right, is that the humour, it helps with the taboo, doesn't it? But it is quite ridiculous that these things are taboo. And it's so crazy to think that we don't ask for help. We kind of assume that this is the way it is, and this is the way it's always going to be. And as you said, it doesn't take much to dramatically improve a woman's life.
No, and there's an awful lot of myths that are really very pervasive when it comes to pelvic floors, and it's really hard to counteract those. So women believe that wetting yourself is normal after having had a baby. It's common, but it's not normal. And they believe that it's normal when you get to be, a bit older, once you're in your 50s and 60s. It's just what happens, and it's not true. It's common, but it's not normal to leak pee or poo or anything else. It's just something that happens because usually of a pelvic floor problem, either that it's too tight, it's not able to relax, or the pelvic floor muscles aren't strong enough, or your bladders become dysfunctional, it's not working in a coordinated way, or lots of reasons why people would have bowel leakage. And all of these conditions can be improved, if not cured, with help. The treatment is amazing. It's really, really effective. And there's gold standard treatment and gold standard evidence that conservative treatment works if we can get hold of them. But trying to get women to talk about it is really difficult. They'll make a joke about trampolines. They'll make a joke about, oh, no, just, one glass of wine for me, or else the tears start running down my leg, and everybody ha-ha-has. But actually the impact that incontinence has on somebody's well-being is universal, because it interferes with everything that you want to do. And it really affects a person's sense of self in a way that very few other things do. Because if you get a condition or an injury or a disease, then that's sort of seen as being out with your control, and it's just, bad luck or circumstance in lots of cases. But with incontinence, there is a shame that's associated with having lack of body control. That is, I can't find a society where, wetting yourself is socially acceptable. The thing that women talk about and get really upset about in clinic is that they are frightened that they will turn into being a smelly old lady. because that's the caricature of what happens when you're older. And I get really exercised about it because there's no need. Like the stats for this is really depressing. It angers me. The stat is it's 1 in 3 women wet themselves, which is huge. But I also think that that's grossly underestimating the size of the problem, because although the official statistic is for all age ranges, it's 1/3 of women that wet themselves. There's not many women that if you say to them, "Do you wet yourself?" they say, "Yes, I do." No.
Yes, I do.
It's really underestimating the problem that if you go to any school gate and say, "I've got a new trampoline, do you want to go?" they'll just laugh at you, because women often it's a small problem that starts, so they have a bit of a leak and they manage that themselves with loo roll, or not drinking anything ever again, or going to the loo every 5 minutes just in case. And it tends to be quite a slow process, so that they don't become suddenly incontinent overnight. It's happened over a period of time. And because women are used to dealing with mess and we're used to dealing with pads, we just manage until you realise that actually this is a huge imposition on your life, and you're no longer exercising, you're no longer being sexually active, you're worried about going on car journeys, and it impacts on people's work and what they wear, and it's horrendous thing.
It's massive, isn't it? And if it's 1 in 3, that is really deeply shocking.
Yeah, and that's what frustrates me, because it is so common. It's 1 in 3 women wet themselves. It's 1 in 9 men. It's fewer men than women because, pregnancy doesn't affect them, menopause doesn't affect them. But it tends to be when the prostate gland gets bigger as they get older and starts to cause chaos that they tend to have a bit of dribbling. But actual incontinence, men tend to become incontinent overnight because they've had surgery for the prostate. And that's really shocking to them, because yesterday they were all right, today no control at all. So they're a joy to teach because they do what they're told. But women genuinely mean to do their exercises. They genuinely mean to try and comply. It's just they're too busy. And it's really hard when you've got a habit of having a life where you're supporting all these other people in whatever role you've got. It's really, really hard to make time for yourself, which is something that I know comes up with your work quite a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm trying to change that, because to be honest, I'm going to sound really hard here, but when you say you don't have time, it's a bit of an excuse, because it's about what you're prioritizing. And if you're not prioritizing yourself and your own self-care and what you need to do, then you're not going to have the time to do it. So sometimes you just have to call them out and say, look, do you want this fixed or not? If you want it fixed, you've got to do the exercise, and you've got to, I don't know, write a note on your fridge or something saying, or whatever it is you've got to do. But it's got to be done.
Yeah, it is really one of the biggest problems with pelvic health. Isn't that women are idiots and they don't know they should be doing their pelvic floor exercises. It's that they're not sure if they're doing them right. So it's really hard to motivate yourself to do something that you kind of really believe is a bit ineffective because you don't think you're doing them properly in the first place. And we just forget.
Yeah, we forget. Yeah.
Because usually these conditions aren't painful. So if you've got, say you're seeing a physio because you've got a frozen shoulder, it hurts. And that reminds you to do your exercises in itself. But if you've got a problem with your undercarriage, it's often completely symptom-free, apart from when you laugh or cough or sneeze, and then you have a problem. So it's really hard to, embed it in your mind. There's things you can get that help. There's an app called Squeezy.
Yeah, great.
And it's NHS endorsed, and it flashes up on your phone, or making it a habit, doing it when you're brushing your teeth. And actually the thing that I think works the best is telling your friends, and then you all nag each other. There was a woman that I saw that went into her work and said to every female member of staff that was of her age in her 50s, this is a problem. We're going to get together at lunchtime and we're all going to do our exercises.
Brilliant.
They did, and they didn't tell anybody apart from themselves. So they were using the microwave to heat up their soup at lunchtime and concentrating while they were using the microwave to do their exercises.
Brilliant.
And then Then they noticed that all the blokes that were using the microwave were also concentrating. Just no idea what the women were doing, but they were just using that 2 minutes to do the pelvic floor exercises.
What a brilliant idea.
Encouraging each other and nagging each other, it's ourselves that we're not good with.
Oh yeah.
A bit of social pressure, I think, is
a great idea.
Really helpful.
I love that. Heating up your soup in the microwave. It's like with any habit that you want to change, though, isn't it? Or adopt. You've got to sort of make it a habit in whatever way you can, you know.
That's part of the reason I think why it takes so long for women to come for treatment, because they manage, they forget, and it's not until something happens that is so embarrassing that, you know, they've had an accident in public, or something has happened that's affected their intimate relationship, or, you know, their children become aware of it, or something. There's always something that's a really horrible situation that it becomes less embarrassing to make the time to deal with the problem than it does just to keep carrying on.
But I think that whole idea of shame as well, but also I talk a lot on this podcast about ageism, and we have, as you said, that perception of being a smelly old lady. So that's, we're being ageist, thinking that incontinence necessarily makes us an old lady, often, in many cases, I think, and therefore there's that shame attached to it. So there's not wanting to actually confront it and do something about it. It's because the shame is so overwhelming.
Yeah. It's only acceptable to not have control of your bladder and bowel if you are a tiny baby or really very unwell. For everybody else, it's something that makes us deeply, deeply uncomfortable. In fact, there was a study done in Canada, excuse me, just a very small study of a nurse that was working in palliative care, and she was looking at adults who weren't actively needing the services of the hospice, but they were, you know, using day services and things. So they had a diagnosis that meant that they weren't going to live to old age, but they weren't desperately ill at the time. And she said to them, what is your line? So what is the thing that you would consider is just makes your life not worth living? And she gave them options of being in a ventilator, being fed through a tube, having uncontrollable pain, not being able to communicate, and being incontinent. And 78% of them said if they didn't have control of their body in front of their family, that was it. They would not fit in.
Wow.
And it's only a little study, and there's not much research into that sort of like the emotional impact, but there's something really visceral about our need to be clean and dry, and if you don't have that, it does something to your sense of well-being that's just enormous. And we know that. You know, everybody knows that. If you wet yourself a little wee bit, you're mortified. Nobody knows. Nobody's aware of what's happened to you. But the sort of anxiety that people experience about, does anybody know? People that have got like quite mild problems in terms of, you know, what we see in clinic, often they're really anxious about odour, and they're scrubbing themselves like they're a potato for fear that their smell, obsessive about changing their clothes, and I totally understand it, but I see a lot of very raw bits. Like, you know, and then they get really uncomfortable because they get skin disorders, and it's totally logical, but equally insane that people put up with this.
Yeah.
And it's our fault, I think. Physios as a profession, we've got responsibility because we're just not getting the message out there. If stress incontinence, the one where you wet yourself if you laugh or cough or sneeze, it's got an 84% cure rate in 6 sessions.
Really? 84% in 6 sessions?
Yeah, it really, for stress incontinence, and that's one study, but there's lots and lots and lots of studies that show this. That's why the NICE guidelines for pelvic health and incontinence, they all say first stop should be physio, because it works. If we can catch women early enough, I mean, there is a point beyond which conservative treatment isn't going to work, but for the majority of women, if we can catch them early enough, then doing pelvic floor exercises and some basic lifestyle changes cures it. But it's what tends to happen is somebody has a bit of an accident and they're mortified and they don't know that there's help available, or they can't access help because, you know, it's easy if you live in a city and you've got hospitals round about you, but if you are living in a remote place, or if you've got lots of dependents and just trying to make the time to come to clinic is a challenge, and you think you're going to do it yourself, and yada, yada, yada. So if you can get into, if we can get hold of the sort of subclinical women and say, please don't put up with this. You know, it happens, it's common, do this, this and this, see if it helps. And if it doesn't, come into clinic, then physio is more effective than medication or surgery.
Wow.
But, I was going to say, but what they tend to do is they wet themselves a bit and they stop drinking just in case it makes them pee, and they go to the toilet all the time just in case they have an accident, and that changes the way that their bladder actually functions, so that makes them more likely to have urgency, which is when you have to go for a pee, but you have to go now. And you should, it's, you know, when you put the key in the door, it's dead common, women have You should be able to wait between 2 and 4 hours between first feeling the urge to pee and actually being going. So this key in the door thing is not normal, and you don't need to put up with it. But I've had patients come in that are disabled, that they're getting benefits because they're peeing every 20 minutes. That their whole life is hijacked just because of a bladder dysfunction that is treatable and manageable, and they do great. But they've been isolated in their own house for years because they can't go out, they can't. It's awful.
I have a friend who confessed to me that she had a degree of incontinence. I don't know what, after having children. And I think I suggested that, you know, she try some running. She said, oh no, I can't do that. I can't run. And then, so this was about, I don't know, 6-7 years ago. And then recently she told me she'd been running. And I said, I thought you couldn't run. She said, oh, yes, it all cleared up. I said, really? What, by itself? She said, yes. I was really surprised because I thought it would all be on a downward slope from now on. And I just went, what? You know, so she'd assumed that, you know, with menopause kicking in, after having had the children, that there was no way that this was going to get any better. And in fact, it got better by itself. So often, I think, you know, we just assume that it's, you know, it's a factor of menopause or it's a factor of getting older. And once it's set in, that's it.
Yeah.
Whereas what you're saying is absolutely no. As soon as you have a problem, ask for help.
Yeah. But there's not any time limit on how long when you can get help. So the normal pattern is somebody has a baby, then their pelvic floors, you know, had quite a tough job, and they're a bit leaky after they have the baby, and that often clears up, usually within the first sort of 6 weeks to 6 months. That'll settle down, just as the muscles go back to normal and your post-pregnancy body returns back to its pre-pregnancy state, or as near as, damn it. And then at menopause, because of the loss of estrogen, the estrogen affects all of your soft tissue, so not just, you know, giving you wrinkles and whatnot, then it affects the ligaments in your body as well. And some of your pelvic floor muscles attach onto ligaments. So instead of everything being tucked up where it was, then the ligaments change, so the position of the muscles change, and that can be enough to lessen the support that your bladder's getting, and that's why you have a problem once you're losing your estrogen levels. So that's fixable. Like, you can't do much to change your estrogen levels. You can have like Vagifem, there's treatments that you can get, pessaries with estrogen in them, that will keep the direct tissue, but it's not going to change the mechanics of your pelvic floor, but you can strengthen the muscles. And there was work done on elderly frail women who were in residential care, who were physically, you know, they were frail, that's why they were in a care facility, but mentally they had all their functions, and they got them doing pelvic floor exercises. Elderly frail women got dry by doing their pelvic floor exercises. So, you know, if they can do it, then there's no excuse for me.
And you talked about women being unsure whether they're doing them correctly. How can they be sure that they're doing them correctly?
it is really difficult because often women are very disconnected with the idea of what their bits are. There's lots of women don't really have much, like, not a confident understanding about what they have downstairs, which is one of the things that I'd really like to change. There's no, like, you know, there's a mismatch between modesty and education, and it's possible to be both educated and, you know, keep your privates private, but you should know about what the basics are. So I kind of liken it to, if you wanted to fix your bingo wings, you've got an idea about what your arm is and what it does, but if it's your underneath and you really don't know what your own anatomy is, it makes it really difficult to be confident that you're doing your bicep curls properly, but with your bit. So there's some work being done trying to find the best analogy to give somebody to get a good pelvic floor contraction. Often in clinic we'll find one works for one woman but has no effect on the other one. So the ones that work the best are, imagine that you've got a zip fitted going from round the back all the way to round the front, and it's zipping up.
Okay.
That works quite well for lots of people.
So you're zipping from the back to the front?
Yeah, because we know that usually people can feel things at the back more than they can have than they do at the front. Now, when you read online, there's lots and lots of advice about how you have to do it so many times at the back and so many times at the front. I've seen ones that are saying, imagine it's a clock and you're going to contract at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. Well, I can't do that. If you can, good for you. I think it's easy to really overcomplicate things. These are the muscles. There's 3 layers of muscle. Like, it is quite a complex bit of anatomy, but all the muscles do the same thing and they all have the same nerve. So from a user's point of view, the sensation that you're looking for is a squeeze and a lift. So imagine that you're trying to squeeze your bum hole shut. Supposing that you're in the lift, the one that works the best from this research was, imagine you're trying to hold in gas. So if you imagine that you're in a lift with
okay,
embarrass yourself,
that works,
and you know that what you've got brewing is nasty. We're all going to know it was you. And that action, when you start talking about, you know, disgracing yourself like that, you squeeze your butt. And that's you doing your pelvic floor contraction, because some of the muscles form your sphincters. So the muscles are unusual in that some of them attach onto ligaments and some of them form a circle to make your sphincters. So the action of the muscle is to squeeze. So if you can imagine that you're doing that, you're holding in gas or a pee, or there's just nowhere to go to the toilet and you're holding on, that's the sensation that you're looking for. Okay. So the zip, holding in gas, imagining that that your undercarriage is a jellyfish, seems to work for some women. So imagine that it's bobbing through the water. So you're contracting and relaxing.
Oh yeah, that
it does work. It tends to go with your eyebrows though, that one. I like, somebody has got, I get this fashion one. Imagine that you've got a straw fitted and you're trying to suck up a smoothie.
Oh my goodness.
If you're imagining that you were sucking up water or Coke or something, that wouldn't work because it has to be something kind of gloopy. You really need to suck. Yeah.
Oh my word.
You get a good laugh at work trying to come up with things. Imagine that you're sitting in a Malteser and you're trying to pick it up.
Oh yeah, they do that with straws, don't they? Yeah.
Yeah, at children's birthday parties.
Yeah.
I'm going to totally add that in.
I'm glad.
So if you're not sure from that, like if you can't feel the squeeze and lift, then there's lots of things that you can try. The easiest one is to have a look. Now these things work for men as well. So it's easy for a man because when he does a pelvic floor contraction, he can see movement. But for women, because it's all tucked down underneath, you need to get a mirror. And lots of women are not comfortable with looking at their own bits as well. That, especially if they've had like a vaginal delivery and they've had a birth injury, it can be really quite traumatic and difficult for women to look in case they think they're going to see, you know, awful scarring or anything like that. And I understand that, but one of the ways of getting your head around it would be to have a look. But for some women,
literally to get your head around
yeah. You do yoga.
If you're incredibly flexible.
What you need is to do this squeeze and lift and hold it for a count of 10 seconds.
Okay.
Which is quite a long time.
Yeah.
And lots of women can do quite a decent contraction, but they can't hold it. So either slowly pays out or else they can do it, but it's like a flicker. It's doing this instead of being a good strong contraction. Yeah. And that's just a weakness problem. Now the reason it's 10 seconds is because there's an inverse urge, there's an effect of that. If you can contract your pelvic floor, it reduces the urge to pee. So if you're in a queue and there's nowhere to go, then if you can do a good strong pelvic floor contraction for a count of 10, you will not need to pee for longer. It'll buy you a bit more time. And if you can't do that, then you know your muscles aren't strong enough. So the only thing with it is when you're doing the contraction, you have to also breathe, because when in clinic we get somebody to show us what they do when they're doing a pelvic floor contraction, and most of them go which doesn't work because your pelvic floor muscles aren't fixed. They move up and down as you breathe. And with your diaphragm. So if you hold your breath, they can get a bit stuck and they become a bit less flexible. Similarly with people that have got a lot of anxiety, people that they show their anxiety in their shoulder position, something happens with your pelvic floor. There's a link to it. So if you've got a pelvic floor that doesn't relax and it's always working really hard, it's got nothing else to give. So when you cough or sneeze, then it can't contract to support the neck of your bladder. A bit like if you're cycling uphill and it's really, really steep and you're giving it to your all, you couldn't possibly overtake somebody in front of you. That's all that you've got. So we need pelvic floors to be able to contract and relax. And that's why when you do this squeeze and lift, you've got to keep breathing at the same time. And that can be really tricky. So if you're not sure if you're doing it right, come to clinic. That's what we do. Check. And it's so easy. It's a bit like once you've got the hang of it, you go, and then you know what you're doing. So it's much easier to then commit to it. So I hold for a count of 10 and then 10 quick flicks in a row. So it would go like, oh, that's going to be embarrassing. Oh, it's all right. It's going away. Oh, that's going to be so smelly. It's all right. It's going away. 10 in a row. So 10 squeeze and lift and then relax. Squeeze and lift and then relax.
And you're holding for 10 each time?
No, just like that. Just up and then down.
So the first one is 10?
Yeah, sorry. First one's a hold for a count of 10 and then 10 quick flicks in a row.
Okay.
And you've got to do both because the first one buys you more time, but the second one is like a coordination thing so that your muscles will kick in when you laugh or cough or sneeze or go on a trampoline, which I recommend that you don't do. And
until you've got the problem sorted.
There's no need. Do something. Yeah. Oh, I know. My family get annoyed because I go on about this all the time. And I'm like, why aren't we doing that?
I think it's absolutely brilliant, and I will support you in any way that I can, because I think what you're doing is so fantastic, and I'm so delighted that finally after 4 years I got to meet you and got to chat. And I want to know all about Edinburgh Fringe and all of that, but I think perhaps we're going to have you back for part 2 and tell us about
I could go on. Well, we've hardly even spoken about bowels. Oh, work. That's fascinating stuff. Oh, well, thank you.
Well, it's just been an absolute pleasure. I think, I'm going to have you back for part 2. We'll talk about bowels. We'll talk about, what it's like being a stand-up comedian. I wish you all the success with your show this year. It was all sold out last year, wasn't it? Is that right?
Yeah. The whole run sold out, which is quite exciting. So this year I'm back with the same show, but I've got a bigger room and we're going to do some research because I get emails from people saying, I saw the show, I'm doing my exercises, I'm fine, thanks very much, which is great for my ego. But the point of it is, it would seem that if you can give evidence-based information to people in a way that's funny, they're retaining it in a way that they're not doing it in other deliveries. So we're going to do some research to see if humour is an effective health promotion tool.
Well, it's the whole telling a story, isn't it? If you tell somebody a fact they don't remember, if you tell them a story, then they remember. We remember it.
Yeah.
So that's what you're doing. Is you're telling stories.
Yeah, quite rude ones.
But,
so we'll see. I'm quite excited. So it's on every day. If you're in Edinburgh, then come and see it, please. I've got to find 3,500 people. So it's every day of the 1st of August to the 26th of August at 4:30 at the Gilded Balloon on Rose Street, and it's called Gusset Grippers.
Gusset Grippers.
Yeah, and there's freebies, and there's a 5'4" singing vulva. It's a bit silly, but it seems to work.
It works.
It'll be embarrassing if it turns out that it's rubbish. If I do this study and there's no effect at all, you've been wasting your time.
No, I know it has an effect. You don't need to do the study. I know these things. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Elaine, and good luck with everything that you're doing. And as usual, we'll have links to how you can find out more about what Elaine is doing, how you get tickets to the show, and everything else. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Rachel. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Cheerio.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Magnificent Midlife Podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, follow, and share it. Also, giving a 5-star review really helps get the word out. You'll find the show notes at magnificentmidlife.com. That's also where you can get my book, Magnificent Midlife, Transform Your Middle Years, Menopause, and Beyond. Make the very best of your next chapter. Help me change the world, one magnificent midlife woman at a time.